In today's video, we have all the latest NHL trade talk, including the latest on Filip Forsberg in Nashville. We also have an update on JT Miller in Vancouver. Would the Montreal Canadiens possibly be trading Artturi Lehkonen? Who might be interested there? Plus, we have news on Phil Kessel's potential landing spots as well, and also trade rumors around the Columbus Blue Jackets. We have a waiver wire claim and some injury updates and more. All that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a lot of NHL news and rumors to discuss here today. Let's start with the news from the NHL waiver wire. We had another claim from yesterday, and we have another player on waivers today making roster space for that said player. So the Dallas Stars took the player that was placed on waivers yesterday by New Jersey, Marian Studnik, and they have placed Tanner Kero on waivers to make room on the roster for him. So, of course, Kero's been on waivers before, hasn't been claimed, so debatable whether or not he gets picked up or not. But either way, Dallas obviously sees the other player as a potential upgrade scenario, so he moves on from New Jersey. Like I said, he was 23 years old, played in 17 games this year, scored 1 goal. Don't really think it's a huge loss for New Jersey, but clearly Dallas sees an opportunity there. On to some injury updates for today. Jake Muzzin of the Maple Leafs has been officially placed on long-term injury reserve. Of course, in yesterday's video, we talked about the scenario that Toronto might do, or some players that they might be looking at, if indeed he is placed on LTIR, with the possibility of being on it for the rest of the season, as Elliotte Friedman was talking about in the previous broadcasts of the Maple Leafs, looking at what options they might have, including JT Miller. And of course, last night it was confirmed after recording that Muzzin is indeed officially on LTIR. Now, they've obviously moved some players around, trying to maximize that space, so you have to think they're probably already scouring the market for not only a replacement for Muzzin, but if they can get a good enough deal on a defenseman, then they very well might look to add a forward here as well. We talked about a couple different possibilities. Not entirely sure a JT Miller trade is something that's really feasible, but we'll talk about that here a little bit further into the trade rumor section of the video. Anyhow, a couple other new injury updates. The Columbus Blue Jackets have announced that one of their young goalie prospects, Daniil Tarasov, is done for the season. He had required hip surgery, and that's a long recovery, so his season has abruptly come to an end, unfortunately. And the Carolina Hurricanes are going to be without defenseman Tony DeAngelo, who's going to be out for about 3 to 4 weeks as well. Now, we also had a scene scenario last night where Josh Anderson of the Montreal Canadiens took a puck to the face. Looks like he could be out, but haven't seen an update to confirm if he's going to be able to return in the short term or if he's going to be out for a while or where things stand. But it certainly didn't look good at the time. That much we know for sure. The Chicago Blackhawks also announced today that their GM search is basically done. They haven't hired or made an announcement on who the new GM is going to be, but as far as the recruitment process, the interviews, all that part is now completed, and they're meeting as a committee to kind of determine recommendations for who that next person is going to be. We know that they've talked to a variety of candidates, including some ones that you can certainly classify as outside of the box, including members from the management team from the Chicago Cubs, and of course you got guys like Peter Chiarelli, of course Kyle Davidson, who's at the helm now. It's certainly in the mix there, as well as a few other NHL executives like Matthew Darche, etc. So it's really hard to say what direction they go in, but we shouldn't be waiting too much longer to find out. Like I said before, I would imagine they're definitely going to want this new person to be in charge before the NHL trade deadline, ideally long enough ahead of the deadline so they can really get a good grasp of where the team is at, especially if they do end up going in a different direction. If it ends up being Kyle Davidson, who's already there on an interim basis, well, certainly he's been there for a while and has a better idea where things stand. And by all accounts, from what we've heard, it does sound like he is a serious contender to get the permanent job. So we'll have to see where things go, and that should be the final GM spot filled here in relatively short order. Now, as I mentioned, we have a lot of different NHL trade rumors to look at here today. There's been a lot of things popping up in the rumor mill over the last couple of days here. Let's get started with Filip Forsberg, who's a player we haven't talked about in some time because it wasn't quite clear if he was indeed, going to be traded. Nashville, I think it's fair to say, is having a bounce back season for sure. They've seen some of their guys who were, previously making lots of money and underperforming, like Johansson, Duchesne and company, kind of performing at a much higher level. and it's caused the team to be a lot more successful and in the playoffs, likely this year. I mean, no guarantees. There's still a lot of hockey left, but so far so good in that Central Division. They're relatively secure as of right now, and certainly, it's hard to imagine possibly trading your top scorer going into the playoffs. But as I mentioned before, David Poile wasn't real keen on going into the deadline and beyond without Philip Forsberg being signed. And the problem is now is not that they don't want to sign him. I think there's a lot of interest to retain the player. The problem is the kind of contract and money he's going to be demanding. Being the team's most productive player for the last while, certainly fair to say he's going to be able to ask for more money than Johansson and Duchesne, who are both making $8 million apiece. They probably prefer his contract to not be more than Captain Roman Josi, who's up around 9. So you're probably looking at an 8.5, 8.75, something in that range. And that's a lot of money to choke down. David Poile is rumored to, not necessarily be real crazy about having another big money long-term deal on the books, given how the other ones have worked out here so far. But given the fact that they've had some bounce-back seasons from some of the other players, maybe it's a little bit of a change of heart in that direction, but it's doubtful in that same sense. So it's really hard to say where things go. I think they'll talk about it. If they can come to an agreement on a long-term contract that makes sense, that Poile likes, he'll likely do his best to get him signed. But if the money is too much, then I think that there's a real chance they do trade him, because really, if you're Nashville, do you go into the playoffs and say, okay, you don't really want to subtract from your team, but at the same time, if you don't really view yourself as being a real solid cup contender, do you really let one of your top assets walk out the door in the summertime for nothing? Now, it doesn't mean that he wouldn't have another shot at signing him, because if you don't sign him by the deadline, but you don't trade him either, he's still going to be there, and you still have to the end of the year until the beginning of free agency to take more attempts at getting it done. But at the end of the day, once you've had enough time to negotiate, you kind of get a feeling where things are at. So, Andy Strickland of Bally Sports was reporting that they were actively shopping him because basically contract negotiations obviously weren't going well. But then you see other insiders like Darren Dreger, for example, Pierre LeBrun, indicating that there's certainly lots of interest to sign him. They are having contract negotiations, but that they're not necessarily keen at going past the deadline with him unsigned. So it kind of really boils down to where things go on that front. But he could be a very interesting piece, and I would even throw in the fact that it might not just be the teams going for the playoffs that view him as a rental. If he's willing to sign an extension for the money that he's looking for, let's say that he's telling Nashville he wants, let's say $8.75 or $9 million, and they don't want to do that, but another team does, could we see a sign and trade? Like, for example, I know one that comes to mind was like the Pajot when he went to the New York Islanders. They immediately turned around and signed him I think it was 5 times 5, right? So certainly that does happen sometimes, but he'd have to forego free agency this summer, and he may not want to do that. He might want to wait and have all the flexibility in the world, and that means he could go as a rental, which reduces his value, and the team's going to have to sort that out. But right now, it does seem like there's a pretty decent chance he gets moved, but again, like anything, it really boils down to contract and how things go negotiating-wise. When it comes to JT Miller, we talked yesterday about the Elliot Friedman statements about the Toronto Maple Leafs, that they should go all in for him, and like I said, that was an opinion of his. It wasn't based on information he had to suggest that, but we saw an update today from Vancouver media, Rick Dollyball mentioning that he believes that the Canucks do have interest in a young defenseman like Timothy Liljegren with the Maple Leafs, if indeed they did make a trade regarding Miller or anybody else. So it certainly goes to show that maybe what Friedman is saying does have a little bit of merit to it, that maybe there have been some, maybe I wouldn't say serious talks, but some discussions going on perhaps in the background that might not be, like I said, really all that noteworthy here as of yet. Maybe some tire kicking, for example, which does happen a lot around the league as they're kind of feeling teams out. But certainly, you have to think it's going to take probably a good 3 assets if anybody is going to pry Miller out of Vancouver. Would it take maybe Liljegren, Robertson, and a first maybe? Fair to say that obviously Rodion Amirov, with the health situation he's dealing with, he's not going to be traded. So certainly one of the top prospects you can kind of take out of the equation there. But just found it interesting to see Vancouver media talking about one of the young players on the Leafs that the Canucks reportedly find as a nice player that they have interest in. So certainly, interesting to see what happens there. Even if a bigger deal does not materialize, there was some talk that the Canucks may send Luke Schenn back to the Leafs, that there was interest in that regard as well. So it is possible, even if it's not the big blockbuster deal everybody's been kind of talking about here in the last couple of days, that it is still possible we might see a deal between the two of them. Now, Dave Pagnotta of the fourthperiod.com was reporting that there's reportedly some trade interest between the New York Islanders and the Minnesota Wild in regards to Josh Bailey being the centerpiece going to Minnesota. I found this really interesting myself for a couple of reasons. One, I think it's fair to say the Islanders do need to shake things up and make a few trades. I think Bailey's a prime candidate to get moved, but he does have a little bit of term left on his contract. So as much as the Wild might be interested for this year, going into the playoffs, with the term he's got, I just don't know how that makes sense. Going into next year and beyond, the Wild are going to have to shed salary. We talked before in the last day or two about Kevin Fiala likely getting moved in the offseason, possibly to a team like Ottawa. So how could they take on another contract in Bailey without more money going out? And if you look at the roster, I just don't know how they would view it as an upgrade. So from the Islanders' perspective, I can see like if they would move a guy like a Matt Dumba, for example, I can see that the Islanders having interest, or any of their, decent forwards that, maybe, but I just don't know that they would want to do that. So as much as Pagnotta says there's interest and there's talks about Bailey to the Islanders, be great to see not Bailey to the Islanders, Bailey from the Islanders to the Wild. I would think that it'd be great for the Islanders. They could unload a few vets here by the deadline. Bailey, Varlamov, perhaps, maybe Cherag, maybe Parise, but I just don't know that deal really makes a lot of sense. So let me know what you think. Does it make sense for Minnesota to target a guy like Josh Bailey ahead of the trade deadline? When it comes to Montreal, one of their players that's been getting a ton of attention, as we previously reported, is Artturi Lehkonen, and one of the teams reportedly showing interest in him, according to the fourthperiod.com, is the Washington Capitals, and that to me makes a lot of sense. Now, of course, like I said, the Bailey rumor doesn't really make a lot of sense to me, but this one kind of does. I can see the Capitals not necessarily going for a big name. We know that they might address goaltending. That certainly wouldn't come as a huge surprise, but certainly like a guy like Lehkonen to them would make a lot of sense, where he can play in that either second line, third line, like a middle six kind of role, go up and down the lineup, kill penalties. I can see that kind of player without a necessarily coming at a huge cost to possibly be something that they end up doing. I don't know what kind of return Montreal will be looking at on Lehkonen. Fair to say they do value him. He's still an RFA, so there's still some cost-controlled time left on that player before he becomes a UFA status. But still, I don't know. I mean, Lehkonen might be able to draw a decent prospect, second-round pick. I'm not really sure what the return would be for him. But either way, the Caps do reportedly have interest. And a couple of potential destinations for Phil Kessel, who's been looking for a trade from the Coyotes all year. He basically asked for a trade early at the beginning of the year during training camps, from what I've heard before, but he's never come to be. There's a lot of teams that just were not really overly interested in paying a price for Phil Kessel, which surprises me, because as much as you can say what you want about Phil Kessel, whether or not he's obviously I know there's been some people that had concerns over his conditioning and all that, or even his attitude, because he did have a few off-ice issues in Pittsburgh, which ultimately led to the trade. But at the same time, he's been nothing but productive, and he's been clutch too. So to me, a team adding Phil Kessel to the deadline would be a team getting a good productive player with a lot of playoff experience under their belt. And apparently two of his former teams, both the Penguins and the Bruins, reportedly do have some level of interest. Now, to me, this is a trade that makes a lot more sense for Pittsburgh. For Boston, maybe I could see, but I'm not sure who are they going to trade for Phil Kessel. They're going to give up Jake DeBrusk for him for 1 year of Phil Kessel. I'm not so sure they want to do that. I think they would prefer a younger player in return, not somebody that's closer to the end of their career on an expiring contract. And at the same time, I'm not really sure that the Bruins need the most help in that position. They could certainly probably use more of a depth center, like his number 2 center, would probably be the more ideal situation. Maybe some help on the blue line. So as much as it's fun to think about seeing him go back to his team where he started, I just don't know that makes the most sense for them. I think other positions make more sense to myself. And when it comes to the Penguins, them having a right winger at it, to me, makes way more sense than Boston does. So could he end up back in Pittsburgh for one last run with Crosby and Malkin and the guys he won 2 Stanley Cups with? Would not rule it out at all, but it's going to boil down to a lot of the price tag and what the Coyotes are looking for. Now, we also heard today that the Columbus Blue Jackets are actually shopping around Alex Texier because they're getting a lot of interest. I would not, maybe shopping around may not be quite the right word, but they're having a lot of conversations around this player, getting a lot of calls, a lot of interest from around the NHL. He's still relatively young. He's still only 22 years old, still in RFA status, still a player who's relatively productive, 20 points in 36 games, got another year, $1.5 million, can play, different forward spots. The kid still has a lot of potential, in my opinion. A little bit surprised to hear that they're, possibly considering trading him, but the asking price right now does appear to be really high. I was quite shocked to hear what the likely asking price is. At least we'll see if this turns out to be true, which we won't really know until later. That's, of course, assuming he does get traded. But the rumored asking price was a first-round pick and a prospect, which is a lot. But you're getting a younger player that's in a cost-controlled scenario that can be productive and still continue to grow and get better, that you can possibly have on your roster for a long time. So I can understand why the price might be where it is, but it does seem to be a little bit steep based on what he's established so far in the NHL, but we'll have to see where things go. Another player that reportedly is likely going to be moved for sure now is Mark Giordano, captain of the Seattle Kraken. We've talked before about how he was likely going to get moved, but it was going to be up to between him and GM Ron Francis and would have discussions. Well, according to Pierre LeBrun on TSN Insider Trading, those discussions have taken place. They have met, they have talked it over, and it is believed that Giordano would like Francis to explore the trade market to consider moving him for a potential playoff run elsewhere. He also reported that the Kraken, as I've mentioned, which is not a huge surprise here, that they have several players on expiring contracts that they are hoping to be very aggressive and busy at the NHL trade deadline, helping kind of guide their roster into the future with hopefully acquiring some more picks and prospects moving forward. So we'll see where the captain of the Kraken and former captain of the Flames possibly end up. We've heard a potential reunion in Calgary before, but not completely sure we see that happen. We've heard the Rangers, Bruins, and other teams having interest in Giordano before as well. So hard to say exactly what things will come to, but certainly sounds like it's a little bit more of a given now that he does get traded. Of course, they're going to find that right deal, but more players will likely be on the go as well. I know Mark Kelly Yarncroke is another player drawing attention to the Washington Capitals, who's also, as I mentioned, interested in Lehkonen. Similar kind of player, similar, kind of contract. Obviously, slight difference in age, but not drastic. So certainly makes sense that they'd be interested in both of those kinds of players. So we'll see where that goes as well. So lots of names out there, all kinds of deals likely being discussed behind the scenes. Trade deadline and leading up to it should be extremely busy. I do have a feeling this could be one of the years where we see, a potential record amount of activity. At least it looks that way. But at the end of the day, deals have to come together. It takes two sides to tango. So we'll see where things go. Let me know your thoughts on anything discussed here today. On all the news and rumors down in the comments, we'll discuss further. If you're new to this channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the latest news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.